Okay, welcome everybody. It's so great to see you here for SfNC's 10-year anniversary. It's our first time in Europe, so very exciting. Really glad that we could be here. This is our biggest meeting yet. So thrilled to be here with you all and to kick off our first panel. So we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and creativity, and we actually had to expand the program to accommodate all the talks and have a special day session just dedicated to this topic, which we're about to do now. And so we'll have one session, we'll have a little break, and then we'll have a second session, and then after that we'll have a discussion with myself, Janet Raffner, Claire Stevenson, and Todd Lubart. And so let's go ahead and get started with our first session. I'll pass it to Matthias Benedict to get us started. Welcome again.
So hello also from my side. It's really great to see so many faces, old ones, new ones, and an amazing lineup of talks coming up in this AI and creativity session. So let's take it away. The first symposium and the first talk in the first symposium will be by John Giro. Enhancing future-oriented thinking in engineering design through cognitive interventions and AI assistance. Please.
Thank you. Good to see so many people. You'll notice my talk doesn't have the word creativity in it, and we'll come to that in a minute. What I want to do is to, let's see if I can do it. There we are. Is to ask the question, are there things we can do that increase fluency? Because we can measure fluency without, well, I was going to say without question, but easily. Lots of other things are harder to measure. And instead of using some of the standard sort of psychometric methods and tests, I work in a more ecologically valid world, which is the world of design. Design is that activity that people undertake in order to change the world. So it's always about the future. But in engineering, design is highly retrospective. And that makes a lot of sense because you really don't want to have too much change, because engineering is a risky business for humans, right? You know, if someone did something dramatic here and the building fell down, my guess is you would be very unhappy, even though it was highly creative, right? So there's this balance. So engineers are taught to think retrospectively. And not only that, the past is codified in legal documents. But they're designing for the future. And that's what I want to talk about. Because often when they design for the future, they're still looking at the past. So what we have, I want to show you, is some results from doing two kinds of interventions: a behavioral intervention and then some AI assistance. If you want, you can go through all this, but basically we have people who are the control group. So one cohort, which is the control group, they get given a request. Actually, everyone gets given the same request. And they have to generate two sets of results, because problems aren't like the alternative uses task. Problems in the world require you to decide what the problem is. And in engineering, that is often expressed in terms of the constraints that the physical world and the legal requirements place on what you're able to produce. And then you have to develop a conceptual design. So it's a two-step process. Actually, it's more than that, but you can articulate it rather cleanly this way. So we have a control group of 30 people. Then we give the next group exactly the same task, but we add, think about the future. That's all. Think about the future. And now we want to see what the effect of that is. And then the third group is given access to ChatGPT or similar. And what we want to do is actually two things. We want to measure fluency, but we also want to see what's happening in their brains in terms of activations. So that's the story. And we're using a 48-channel FNIRS cap. And here's the results, and then we can talk about them a bit. This is a heat map for the control group for the constraints. So it's the average across the 30 participants, and for the concept development. And we use that as the base. Then we tell them, it's a different group, but we tell the next group, here's the task, but we want you to think about the future. And this is what we get. We get, and we can give you all the measurements, but what we get is increased activation in, and we can go through if you want, in different regions. And then the third group, you're given exactly the same task, gain access to ChatGPT, and this is what the activations look like. Very, very different and very low. Less than low, actually. Now, paralleling this, we also get the number of ideas. But just looking at this, we can see something pretty dramatic happening, right? And there's two rather crude interpretations you can make of what this means. But I'm going to preface my remarks by telling you a story that may or may not be apocryphal. Socrates complained to Plato that by writing down his thoughts, he was damaging his students, because students would no longer have to think, because they could just read it, and their brains would turn to mush. We happen to think that the invention of written language is one of the most profound contributions to human development, but it didn't look like that at the time. So what's the projection here? People's brains are going to turn to mush. AI is going to take over all these cognitive tasks, and we won't have to worry. Of course, the other interpretation is this gives us some cognitive surplus, and now we can do other things that we might otherwise not have done. So let me just very quickly go through the other part. You can see that we're doing different types of coding on the language, on the verbalizations that people make concurrently. And where, if you want, that's sort of less interesting. What's interesting here is the right-hand table, the mean number of constraints, which is the first task, present thinking, future thinking, and then future thinking with AI. And these are each of them is statistically significantly different. So even a simple prompt like future changes people's behavior and their brain activity. When we do the same with AI assistants, again, we get really noticeable differences. So what can we get out of this? Assuming fluency is some proxy related to creativity, the implication is that people get more creative with different kinds of assistance. And you can look at this in more detail if you want. Thinking about the future is more cognitively demanding. Using AI, however, reduces the cognitive load. And I want to stop there. And I do want to thank the US National Science Foundation, in case they're listening.
Thank you very much. So it's fortunately it's not time for questions now, but maybe in the break. And I announce Janet Ravner for the second talk. Welcome. Questions? It's 7 minutes.
Go quickly, yes. I'll do my best. I saw the 7-minute constraint last night, so I see how fast I can go. But very briefly, it's a pleasure to be here and to present some joint work with also some excellent colleagues that are here, including Matthias and Isabella, and I think Simon said was supposed to be here, but couldn't make it. So I am presenting a work that is currently under review. It's entitled Agentic Perspectives on Human AI Collaboration for Image Generation and Creative Writing, Insights from Think Aloud Protocols. And very broadly, my main interest amidst this big field of AI and creativity is human AI collaboration. And particularly, how can we better understand the types of interactions between humans and AI, also from a computer-human interaction perspective? And how do people approach and navigate this process? And so there's a wealth of literature that's coming out now on this area, but what has been missing has been more of a deep dive into the processes of this human AI collaboration in different modalities and different contexts. And so for our work, we started with some of the theories out there and frameworks, both in agentic decisions, also metacognition and self-regulation, and looked at how we can apply these frameworks to think aloud transcripts from human AI interaction. So you are probably familiar with these. I leave them up there. Our work is by no means the only work on this area. It's, to my knowledge, some of the first work that's really going in depth into both the interactions, so various types of interactions in different settings. But I also highly recommend looking at some of these articles that focus on also key concepts that we explored, such as our research questions: how is the regulation of the creative process structured when collaborating with AI? And how does cooperation with AI affect agentic creative self-beliefs over time? And in short, there were 2 small studies. We used both an image generation tool that was manipulating sliders, as well as the text to image that many of you are familiar with. So it was very important for us to also look at the affordances of the tool. Human AI co-creation is not all the same. It depends highly on the contexts and the affordances and what you're creating. How are you interacting with the system? Are you interacting with a shared product? Are you interacting with the agent? So we looked at 2 different types of image generation. And then for the creative writing, we looked at a tool, not ChatGPT, but a tool called Pseudowrite, where you can see here, where you get AI suggestions for your writing. And we're looking at how people integrate those suggestions into their writing. And I mentioned something here about this interaction between collaborators. From the human-computer interaction field, there's a framework called CoFi, which is a co-creative framework for interaction design. And prior to our in-depth analysis on the Think Aloud interviews, we examined each of the tools under this lens to look at exactly these topics or these items. Collaboration style, so how is the task distributed? Is the AI and the human working on the same task? Is it planned? So for example, do I have to activate the AI in order for it to respond to me, or is it spontaneous? Can it give comments at any time? These are very important to understanding factors of the human agency in the co-creation process. We also looked at interaction with the shared product. So for example, is their contribution pleasing, provoking? Is it something that pushes the user, or is it something that agrees with the user? Is the tool helping in a generation process or evaluation or extension? So these lay a foundation for how we can then analyze the think aloud interviews. And for that, we built off theories of metacognition and self-regulation, and ultimately distilled our code book down to these 4 different concepts: autonomy in the creative process, control over creative action, creative self-efficacy, and ownership over the creative product. And just a quick snippet, you can see some of the results. Here, one of them was complex coexistence of agency-related processes. And we looked at within that co-creation process. So here, participants were using the sliders. In this case, they felt an initial autonomy, subsequent loss of control when they couldn't figure out how to manipulate the system, followed by which led to, in this case, negative feelings of ownership. So when they weren't in control of it, they felt, oh, okay, this really couldn't be mine at this point. But then it was sort of counteracted by positive self-efficacy and participants adapting and refining their creative direction. So this is really highlighting the dynamic nature of these key concepts of agency, so that they're not static. It's not, you can't ask someone, do you feel in control when you're using X? That feeling of control changes over the process of the creation. From the writing sample, sorry, it's a bit blurry. You see, this is how we analyzed it in our paper. We looked at a vignette. You can see here that participants, they had this intense switching between creative processes, managing their own workflow. So this is new in the context of working very rapidly with AI, that there's this quick sort of switching back and forth, changing their directions and changing their strategies, which I will also get to. Autonomy amid control challenges, which was also this quite interesting result, that despite sort of persistent refinements and this negotiation with control over the system, oh, I can't get it to get exactly what I want, I am encountering these types of problems, etc. It forces the creators to negotiate between their personal vision and AI-driven outcomes. And so that negotiation process is quite interesting. We found that, as I mentioned before, it changes over time. So in the beginning, there's this high degree of autonomy, feeling liberated, exploring ideas. In the middle phase, they're refining outputs, trying to get this closer alignment between what they want and what the system is actually capable of doing. However, I should note that there were some conflicting experiences in the data. For example, participants could feel autonomy without full control, and that was unexpected. So we anticipated that the more control, the more autonomy they would feel, but that was not always the case. In the end, there was growing efficacy as they adapted to the AI capabilities and limitations, and then also the strategy development. So some of the strategies that we noticed that they used: progressive refinement, selective appropriation, and what I also think is quite interesting, and I've seen in other cases now, counter-inspiration. So looking at a suggestion or inspiration from AI and actually going in the opposite direction. Almost done, last slide. This comment about this reflection on ownership. So the discussion of ownership is not as prevalent in creative communities now. This discussion of, okay, I'm an artist, I paint something, of course it's mine. But with the sort of insert of generative AI, this has become a big topic of ownership and authorship, nuances there. But what we found in our studies is that it's not binary. So it's a spectrum. Participants would often state, I felt this was 75% mine, or okay, if the AI did this or that, it would be partly mine. So that also depends on the task contributions. But what I thought was also really interesting as it plays into this dynamic discussion is the sense of ownership evolved throughout the process. Participants commented unprompted about the ownership that they felt over what they were making, their story. So for example, they said, this sounds more like me now, I feel like it's mine. So I'll leave you there with that. There's the funding and some of the collaborators who are here.
Thank you, Jenna. Maybe it's time for one question. Yes, please.
Yeah, the notion of autonomy without control. Is it forever really control process? Not working with AI, often like do the same or writers talk about in the novel just
Yes, so I will lead you to my definition of control over creative action here explicitly. So it's not exactly control over the creative process, but specifically over action. So, it involves individuals having a high command over one's actions and decisions within the creative process. And so that's, for example, how they're moving their hands, what they're putting on paper. So this control over that action and interaction was the key component that we were investigating. But I agree with you definitely that there's a lot of room to discuss whether or not this control in the process is to what degree we have it and to what degree that changes when we integrate co-creation into the process.
Thank you very much. So, dum. And the next talk is by Paul Di Stefano from Roger Beatty's lab. Please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paul, as mentioned, from Penn State, and today I'm going to be talking about my work evaluating AI's ideas, the roles of individual creativity and expertise in human-AI co-creativity. So jumping right in, I'm sure we're all quite familiar with what human-AI co-creativity is, as we're all here, but just so that we're all on the same page, I hear him defining this as the interaction between humans and AI to generate creative solutions. And so we know a lot of things about co-creativity already. I mean, AI is very available, it's free, it's fast, and it can be helpful for humans, but there's also some potential downsides that I think we need to emphasize a little bit more. And there's concerns about like the shifting role of humans in this co-creative process. How does the role of humans kind of change throughout the relationship between control? So the question here, who benefits most from AI and creativity, is a main question that I was curious about. So one of the things that kind of was interesting to me as we thought about this question was domain expertise and domain-specific expertise and individual differences in creativity. So within that, we had a couple of different hypotheses because nobody really knew what this would exactly look like. So one potential way that this could look is that rising tides lifts all boats, right? Everyone in this co-creative setting gets better as a result of co-creativity. It could be that the rich get richer. You need some baseline of expertise or skill in order for you to get the benefit of AI. Or it could be that there's some sort of limitation of having expertise and there's like a catch-up effect, essentially, where the experts don't do that well, but lower performing people are able to improve more dramatically. As far as what we actually did, we designed a study here so we could test these interactions. And so we recruited 311 undergraduates from Penn State. We had 99 engineering and 212 psychology students. This was so we have an actual difference in domain expertise. And they did a simulated co-creativity task. It's simulated because they're not working with AI in real time. Everything from the AI was pre-generated, but this allows us for greater control between the different participants. And so they did an engineering design problem, for example, reduce air pollution in cities. And this engineering design problem helps to have expertise, but it's not explicitly necessary. So the psychologists could still perform this task. And they would generate original and effective ideas, and then they would evaluate these ideas, their own ideas, and the ideas generated by the AI. And then we had a couple of different measures like domain expertise, and we measured creative self-efficacy. And the full paradigm here is what they did for one task. So they did a self-efficacy question, and then an initial generation, which we call idea one, and then they self-evaluated, and they evaluated 6 ideas from AI. And then they did a second generation after having seen those ideas, idea 2, and then they did another self-evaluation. So then jumping right into the results, we see generally that evaluating AI improves creativity. So as you can see here, as a result of getting these AI ideas, as a generalization, everybody kind of does better. You can kind of see from those lines, going up a little bit across both groups from idea 1 to idea 2. So on average, people improve, and we didn't see any significant differences between the groups. And the engineering group consistently outperformed the psychology group. So we kind of take this to suggest that rising tides does lift all boats to an extent. And then we also were looking at some predictors of co-creativity. So we used linear mixed effects models, and we saw that idea 2 originality and effectiveness was predicted by their baseline creativity, which was their idea 1 performance, and their domain expertise, in that people who have more expertise and more creativity did better at idea 2. So the main takeaway from this is that pre-existing expertise and creativity are key for co-creative outcomes. But we were also interested in how AI was actually inspiring participants. So we came up with a novel categorization scheme where we looked at their idea 1, their idea 2, and then categorized them. So just to kind of go through this really quickly, for example, somebody said for their idea 1, educate people on air pollution, and their idea 2 is increase awareness of going green. This is essentially the same thing in our coding scheme. So we said it's a direct adoption. Sorry about the awkward slide there. And then like another example here, create an AI overlord that rewards clean cities and provides feedback. And then their idea 2 is create an AI that generates energy and then rewards clean cities and punishes polluters. Although they are obsessed with AI, like many people here, we categorize this as an improvement. They're thinking around the same thing, but they're actually making the idea better by adding something else. Create a mass air filtration system that filters out toxins. And then their idea 2 is subsidize green energy companies and install solar-powered air purifiers. So this is a combination of ideas. They're taking ideas from the AI, from themselves, and they're kind of like mixing them together a little bit. And then the final categorization here that we have is add vacuum chambers to the tailpipes of cars to collect pollutants. And then their idea 2 is enclosing polluting cities in domes to protect the atmosphere. Although it was taken right out of the Simpsons movie, this was not said by the AI or themselves originally. So for us in this context, this is a new idea. And so using these 4 different categories that we have, we were able to kind of approximate how the AI was inspiring participants. So here, this kind of breaks down exactly the distribution of each of the different interactions across the 2 different groups and in total. And the main thing to kind of point out here is the psychology students were directly adopting ideas much more frequently than the engineering students. They were more likely to come up with a completely new idea. So this difference is statistically different and kind of reflects the differences in how AI expertise kind of might interact. So the takeaway of this being expertise influences how AI ideas are used. So just as a brief discussion here, so there are a lot of future directions here, obviously. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're all here, but we want to assess this in real time rather than using our simulated paradigm. We think that the simulated paradigm helps us to make comparisons a little bit easier, but as a baseline, we obviously have to take this a bit further and let people use AI themselves. And then affecting the long-term effects of co-creativity. I mean, as John mentioned, right, we don't know necessarily, like maybe AI is going to allow people to have like reduced cognitive load, and what does that look like long term? We kind of have to work to figure that out. As far as some implications here, increasing focus on expertise and individual differences in co-creativity. While we know that these things are certainly important, additional work needs to be done to kind of see how these different dynamics kind of play out in the real world. And AI systems generally should support generation and evaluation. A lot of the work so far has been primarily focused on generation, so we also should focus on idea evaluation and letting people actually evaluate the ideas to what they think is actually meaningful. As a just overall conclusion, we found that AI improves creativity for both novices and experts, and this supports the rising tides lifts all boats hypothesis. And we found that individual differences exist in how the groups were inspired by AI ideas. So thank you very much. This is a QR code to the preprint if you're interested. And I'm also going to be at poster session 3. So if you have any questions, come talk to me. I'd love to talk about this. So thank you to all of you and to my collaborators. Hmm.
Are they environment?
Mhm.
Are they and this seems
No, that's an interesting question. As far as like, I mean, there are students, so their average age here is like 19 and a half. So they're all, you know, but we do see statistical differences between, so the STEM ICA, which is what we're using, it takes into account things like how well they engage in like STEM related activities. So as a generalization, this specifically is measuring like their engineering expertise or STEM expertise more generally. So it is a bit indirect, but if you have any like specific recommendations on how we could assess something like that, especially in college students, that, you know, that'd be great. If there's time for another.
I was asking AI where it was pulling its art from.
Mhm.
And it basically responded that it wasn't capable of pulling it, because much of the data was actually, many of the paintings were uploaded basically without
Mhm.
crediting anybody. And so there is no crediting in much of the information, which is, we basically stole, it didn't give credit. So it's not possible to look for that. And that, I think, is a big ethical
Mhm.
question, which itself, I mean, it was going to refer me to lawyers who are studying the issue and ethics people who are, but I think it's kind of the elephant in the room, because how do we get credit? We all want credit for what we do. But it's a necessary question to ask.
No, it's a great question. I think that it's one that needs to be addressed a little bit further. I mean, there's a lot of concerns about using AI in this aspect, like environmental concerns are a serious thing as well, right? So I'm not saying we have it all figured out, but as far as the accreditation, right, like the way that they got these data are not ethical, right? They are really just stealing from whomever they want. And as far like there are legal concerns, but as far as scientists, I don't think there's much, you know, we know that those tools are now out there, and understanding how people are going to use them is an important question, but other, you know, lawyers should be asking those questions about, you know, the ethical things. But it's a great question that needs to be addressed.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Supplemental, okay, good. So, and I think we have a slight change of the program. Estelle Wu is currently not here, so we move forward with Clin Lai. The next talk, please, the floor is yours.
Did I do something? I did something. Password? Yeah. It asked for a
Does anyone know the password of
Oh.
Lorentz theory?
Okay, wait down. It's because you open my session, it will not. Oh, it's coming. You just like good.
Yeah, just go. You just
Ça means-
password.
Ça c'est shutdown. Ouais, d'un coup. Et du coup, pardon.
Pas de souci.
Parce que là, je me suis dit, si je me connectais à ma fiche webcam, en fait, on perdait le portefeuille qui était en
C'est le début des ennuis si c'est pas la bonne session.
C'est ça. Ok, super. Merci beaucoup.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I have my notes there actually. Okay. Hi. Good morning. So today I'll be talking about creative or uncreative partner, comparing human and AI as partner in collaborative creative task. So firstly, I'd like to thank the generosity of the APA Div 10. That's how I managed to microgrant. That's how I'm able to carry out these findings, and of course, all the collaborators. Yeah, so let's go to the next slide, if it will go to the next slide. Okay, so creativity is social in nature. So the question is, can AI be our social partner? Across generation and evaluation tasks, creativity, we have human partners in these tasks, we know that cross-disciplinary collaborations enhance creativity, with multi-author research across geographical regions typically correlated with more citation and innovation. And also from mini C to big C, we can see that creativity is evaluated through social recognition, and it derives value and impact through social interaction and recognition. So with this increase in using generative AI and its ability to mimic human speech, it is kind of prudent to study its influence as a potential creative partner. So generative AI can be a positive influence on creativity. Some research says that it increases an individual's feeling of self-efficacy in creativity. And it could also increase productivity, producing more ideas, or help individuals overcome fixation, which is being stuck on the same idea. But there are also a lot of research that says that it could be negative. For instance, individuals who are already high in creativity, that might result in a decline in their writing abilities. And there's also research to suggest that using ChatGPT produces less semantically distant ideas in general. So previous research with generative AI tend to focus on comparing condition where you have one individual versus an individual with AI, so with and without AI. And it tends not to also have any limit in contribution from each partner. So that's the gap that I'm addressing here. I have a direct human-human collaboration and direct human-AI collaboration. And to truly study if AI can be a creative partner, I argue that we need to have this sort of comparisons. Across the AUT and short story tasks, the individuals, they collaborate on a turn-by-turn basis. So role A will start first, and then role B will start later. And they did a AUT task and short story task. So this results in a more tightly controlled experimental setup with approximately exactly 50% contribution from each partner. And my hypothesis is that the human AI pairing will score higher in originality, but will score lower in variance. And we will see if that pans out across the different analysis. So firstly, for all the graphs here, the AUT is on the left side, and the stories on the right side. Scores for the AUT were obtained through our lab's automated scoring system, Klaus, the neural network that is fine-tuned to score responses from the AUT and correlates better with human rating than the SemDisk. And stories itself was scored with the DSI, Divergent Semantic Integration, an algorithm that estimates the creativity of English narratives or stories by computing the semantic distance between all words in the text. So the first set of results here, I used the mixed effects linear model, as you can see below. First results here show that the hypothesis is supported, and that in the AUT task, using the full data set of human and AI response, the human-AI dyadic pair had significantly higher originality. And there's also some interaction with the role itself with A and B. That's not a case in the short story. Once I added in, however, the control of the, added in the control of the item itself. So whether they did the AUT with a bottle or a book, and I added in fluency, which is the number of ideas, and the word count itself. That suggests that all the significance has been removed. And ultimately, I'm interested in the human responses. So I removed the AI response from the data set and ran the same model, and now the results is reversed. So there's actually highest creativity level in the human-human pairing than the human-AI pairing. And the result for the story task remain pretty much the same throughout the full data set or with the controls in place. There is no dropping of the AI response for the story itself, because then the story doesn't make any sense. So variance using the Levine's test also showed a significant difference on the left side here. So this is the AUT task. However, removing the AI response result in no significance in the variance of AUT scores, which implies that the larger variance was driven mostly by the AI's responses. Okay, so last but not least, looking at the pairwise semantic distance across each response in the AUT sentence of the story, the semantic distance appears to increase in the human partner condition, but largely remains the same in the AI condition. So this suggests that over time, these sentences grow further apart with a human partner, but stayed more or less the same with an AI partner. And of course, there are further analysis to be performed. But in summary, it seems that generative AI may help you to generate ideas, but your own ideas may be less creative or potentially less creative over time. And yeah, that's the end. I'm happy to take any question. I also have a poster session on Friday, so happy to talk then. Oh, there's, oh. I didn't see you.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's great to see how far this work has come. Thank you. So I was just curious, in the interaction between the human and the algorithm, was it spontaneous or structured turn taking? So was it, okay, the one human, and in both cases, was it human did one thing, then AI did one thing, human did one thing, AI did one thing? Or was it a spontaneous, like a conversation? And what was the decision for that? Either way.
Yeah. So it was actually structured. So if they were assigned role A, if the human were assigned role A, then the human starts first. If the AI is assigned role A, actually the AI starts first. Yeah. And the decision to actually stick with this highly structured manner was I'm interested in the influence of the ideas itself. So I'm trying to eliminate all sorts of potential social interaction, like, oh, hi, how are you? That the AI will just say, I'm just a large language model, or something like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and the final talk will be given by Liane Gabora. Please. So, actually, you're not. Okay. So, again.
So I'll just start out by saying how this talk started. Every year when I teach my psychology of creativity class, I've always asked them the following question. I've asked them to come up with words and then come up with meanings for those words. And then I tell them to get into pairs and to have them guess which meaning goes along with which word. And I tell them to make sure that the words and the meanings feel right, that they feels like that meaning belongs with that word. And inevitably, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've been teaching this class for 20 years, and every year the result is the same, that the students can all guess which meanings go along with which words. And I've been doing this to make the point that the organization of words and their meanings in the human mind is different from that of computers. And it seems like with LLMs, we actually have the first time in which this would not work, in which it actually wouldn't tell you that the, sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. That it may be that we now have computers that actually the organization of words in their memories is similar to how words and meanings are organized in their minds. So that gave rise to the following experiments. So when people come up with a new word to refer to a newly identified entity or phenomenon, their word meaning choices reflect both logic. So they might combine two words with similar sounds like glamorous and camping to form glamping. And it also might reflect the associative organization of language in the brain. Like the word glitch, it has that harsh GL sound and then that clipped itch sound. And it kind of does create a small but jarring snap in the system kind of feeling. So humans generate and interpret new words in ways that reflect patterns in our knowledge bases. So for example, I'll just give you a question. Does FLUG blogs mean an official badge used to signify bureaucratic clearance in a political institution? Or does it mean a kind of shoe that you walk on water with? So put your hands up for A and put your hands up for B. All right, so there was uniform agreement here, even though there's no logic to this, right? It doesn't mean anything at all. So there's no right answer since it doesn't mean anything, but most people say B, so that you can sort of think about why this might be. Well, the GL, BL, and GG sounds are kind of round and bubbly and buoyant, and the FL sound echoes back the movement of words like float and fly. So the hypothesis underlying the study was, do you think large language models such as LL can generate and interpret new words in ways that feel right to us? And to do so would require both knowledge of human logic and knowledge of these associative organization of the brain, as I've been talking about. And so we hypothesized that large language models match meaningless word meaning pairs in the same way that humans do. So that given a set of possible words and their meanings, they would match FLUG blogs with shoes you walk on water with and generate word meaning pairs that humans guess correctly. And so I carried out a pilot study in which I prompted ChatGPT to generate new words along with their corresponding meanings. And here's some of the examples of the words that it came up with. So sproinkify, to energize or invigorate something in a lively, bouncy manner. Wisplight, a faint or gentle light, often perceived as calming and serene. And glubbuzzle, the state of being perplexed or confused while simultaneously feeling slightly down or disheartened. And so then I asked ChatGPT, how did you come up with these words? And it gave the following explanation. It said it retrieves linguistic patterns and makes creative combinations. And then it applies morphological rules, which it evaluates for coherence. And then it generates the output. It said that it was playful and trying to be playful and creative, that it employed linguistic morphology, and that it used both onomatopoeia and affixation. And so this gave preliminary evidence that ChatGPT is actually mimicking the aesthetic associative processes underlying human word meaning generation. And so then what we did was we had two different LLMs, ChatGPT and Claude, and they were both prompted to generate 20 word meaning pairs and then to match each other's words with their appropriate meanings. So just some examples of words that ChatGPT came up with: loomish and nestle, and those were ones that Claude got right. And some examples of ones that Claude got wrong were snozzle and thrindle. So here's the results. ChatGPT got 20 out of 20 right, which really does suggest that it is doing something in the way that humans do. And Claude got 18 out of 20 right. And just to emphasize that before 2017, we never could have had a computer that would get this kind of question right. So both ChatGPT and Claude were able to generate word meaning pairs that, despite being meaningless, were interpretable. And so we then asked them to explain to us, how did you do that? And ChatGPT said it described its thought process as follows. So it's looked for sound and association roots, and then it looked for the emotional resonance, did some context matching, and then eliminated some that it didn't like and found the best fit. And Claude described its thought process as follows: look for sound symbolism, linguistic echoes, word structure and rhythm, onomatopoeic qualities, emotional resonance, internal contrast, and also employed cultural and etymological references. So this is preliminary evidence that ChatGPT mimics the aesthetic associated processes underlying human word generation and human meaning interpretation. And so we're continuing this work. And so the next step is to compare this performance with that of humans. And so we want to assess to what capacity are we able to generate word and interpret word meaning pairs that reflect the universally experienced properties of sound, so onomatopoeia, versus language-specific phonetic associations to semantically related words. And then we'll test this by comparing how people with different language backgrounds respond in this particular word meaning pair generation task. And then we will investigate the extent to which LLMs generate and interpret word meaning pairs across different languages in a human-like manner. So we're going to use both bilingual English Chinese speakers and ChatGPT to invent Chinese words for each English language word meaning pair from the previous study, and then determine whether ChatGPT's word generation and interpretation abilities can actually extend beyond different languages. And that will give us some sense of how it's actually getting these words to and meaning pairs that feel right to us. And then this has implications for the ability for it to be a helpful co-creator and for it to generalize across different languages. And that's it.
Time for 1 or 2 questions. Yes, please.
So did you hear me so far all right?
I think so.
Okay. So did the LLMs ever produce any non-words that are not phonetically or morphologically okay within that language?
They seemed right. They seemed actually very similar to the words that humans come up with in the same kind of task. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the interesting talk. My question would also be in this direction. Can humans actually distinguish between human-generated and LLM-generated non-words?
That's a great question. We don't know the answer to that yet. We actually haven't finished going through the ethics proposal before this conference. But that is something that we will be asking them. So maybe ask me next year.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask, did you try different orthographic deep languages? Because why you choose the Chinese?
That's just because the graduate student who is working on this project speaks Chinese, and that was her choice.
But did you think about to take some other languages, because it's a different patterns, you know, in the letters, in a different orthographic deep of the languages?
That would be really interesting to do. Yeah, I mean, it would be fantastic to try this with a whole bunch of different languages, and maybe that is something that we will look into. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much again. This was an amazing first panel and or symposium. And now we take a short break. We will be back at 3:30. And yeah, enjoy the break and see you soon.
So look at how I did. I kind of wanted you to keep going so that I could kind of figure out what your pattern. Let me feel it this.
Whoa. Okay.
I'm number 4. It's so funny. I came here I gave a talk tomorrow. It was like about like a culminating 2014. No, not essence. It's the analogy precept that I and I remember really super sick ahead of time, and now I'm also sick, not as bad as I've been. And I was standing there and I gave this talk, and then there was somebody who was right to badger me. What she thought the announcer. I totally got all the analyses and and I knew my stuff, but then he started asking that's my yeah, exactly. Yeah, so oh, there you go. Thinking a positive, yeah, but other than that, it was cool. And Diedrich, Jinx sat over there, if she asked some really nice questions, it was super. It's already.
No, but I want to make sure it's the correct version.
Okay, I'll just quickly, I don't want to
Spoil. Yeah, I think. Wait, I think it's going to be too far down. Forget it.
Okay.
I will just
Sorry,
improvise.
I think it's good. I mean, whatever the version,
Yeah.
the latest version you sent is
Should
there.
be fine.
Yeah. I get it. I understand. I was just
It's not working very well, but even not enough spot. We already know like where certain concepts are.
Okay, everybody, if you could find your way back to your seats, we're going to get started with the second half of the session now. So I just start. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here in a few seconds. Okay, welcome back to our second session on AI and creativity. So I'm going to be moderating the session and also giving the first talk. I'm excited to talk to you about, sorry, Leela, do you have something? Okay, Leela is moderating the session. Relieving me of my duties as moderator. And do you have anything to say? Yes, that's okay. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. What she said. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Leela. Okay, yes. Welcome back again. So I'm excited to talk to you about some preliminary results from a community-driven project on whether we can train an AI system to assess human creativity across different tasks, modalities, and languages. Okay, and so as creativity researchers, we all know that measuring creativity is hard, right? Not to mention that what tasks you use and how you define creativity, but any kind of open-ended generation task is just a lot to find human raters to do the scoring and to do it in a systematic and reliable way so we actually have good data to have meaningful results. And so what we have been trying to do in our lab recently, and other labs are working on this as well, of course, is to see if we could train different AI models to match human ratings on different creativity tasks. And most of this work so far has been on single tasks, so alternate uses, metaphors, stories, and most of it has been in English, although some recent work has expanded to different languages. But the point is that we've been training these kind of like single models to do one task and generally in one language. And so what we were exploring in this project is whether we can train like a universal system that can score creativity across all tasks and all languages. And so this is a hard problem, and I'll kind of share some preliminary results on our efforts to tackle it so far. Okay, and so before I get into the data set, I want to acknowledge Simone Lucchini, who has gathered all the data set and curated it, has been working with the models and training the models. And basically, what we've been doing so far is trying to track down as much data as we can from creativity tasks with human ratings. And so we've managed to collect 247 some thousand responses to different tasks, all scored for originality or creativity. And we have the different tasks here on the x-axis of this graph. And not surprisingly, the most overrepresented one is the AUT, right? So everyone's got some uses data sitting around. And so we're really grateful for everyone who's contributed data to this. And beyond the AUT, there's actually really a lot of interesting tasks here that I was like, hadn't been that familiar with, which were kind of nice to learn about. Real life problem solving, different drawing tasks. We have metaphors and so forth. So there's 30 different tasks. And they're both text and images. And I put an asterisk next to the images because I don't have results on that yet. It's going to be coming soon. We've just been tackling the text data so far. And as you can see here, we have 11 languages. So that's represented here in this little key here on the right-hand side. And so mostly English, but we have a good representation of other languages in the data set as well. Okay, and so the model that we are training here, we're calling Oracle, which stands for Originality Assessment Across Languages. And we are starting off by training one of the most capable AI models out there right now, which is GPT-4o, aiming to see if we can get it to learn some patterns in the responses across all the tasks and all the languages to predict human creativity ratings. And again, this is just on text only so far, but the ambition is to bring everything together, text and images, kind of multimodal system. And so in addition to testing the model on new responses, which is kind of like a must-pass test, like it has to be able to predict new responses it hasn't seen before on tasks it was trained on. Otherwise, it's not going to be that useful. We also have different levels of generalization. So the next up from new responses would be new items or new prompts to the same tasks it had seen. So this could be different writing prompts, different creative problem solving prompts. But again, the same tasks it had seen before during the training. And then we also have new tasks that the model has not seen during training. So this is getting more challenging then as a kind of out of distribution problem for the model to try to solve. And then we also have new languages that were not in the training data. And to be clear, the model has seen, so the GPT has seen Spanish in its pre-training. This is just the kind of creativity training that we have asked the model to do. Okay, so that first test, so we're trying to use the data set that we have of the responses and the task to see if the model can predict new responses that it hasn't seen before. And we can see it's doing pretty well on this, again, kind of must-pass test. So a correlation between the human ratings and the GPT ratings at 0.7. So this is already, I think, pretty useful result, suggesting that the model is kind of learning something across these many tasks in many different languages that's allowing it to predict the human ratings on responses that hasn't seen before. So that's kind of encouraging. And so next up is new items. So tasks that it has seen during training, but new items or prompts that has not seen. You can see that it's doing okay, definitely not as strong as the initial correlation of 0.7, kind of like around 0.5 for this one. And so this suggests the model can learn to score new items kind of moderately well. This is collapsed across a couple of different tasks. Okay, so kind of going further down the generalization tests here, we have new tasks that the model has not seen. We could already see here with the plot titles generation that the model is not doing as well. So like 0.28, not so great. And then, but poems we see that are doing, the model's doing better, kind of double the performance of the other correlation. So we can say here that this particular model is scoring new tasks kind of variably, kind of depends on the task. And it depends in part also on the inter-rater agreement for that matter. So that's going to be the ceiling as to how well a model can do, is how much humans are agreeing with each other, that we're kind of bringing their scores together. And finally, the new language. So again, the model has seen Spanish before in pre-training, but has not seen these different tasks. And we have 3 different tasks here. So AUT, metaphors, and short stories. And we can see here, again, kind of moderate to higher correlations, but variable. So performance is okay, but it's varying across these different tasks. Okay, so we have a lot of future directions for this data set. This, as I mentioned, this is only kind of like a first pass. I didn't even get to bring in the image data yet, so we're going to try to bring in the image data, merge it with the text data, and train an open source model, which is Mistral, so representing France here. It's a French AI company, which is a really strong multimodal and open source model that allows us to kind of look inside what's going on in the model too, having open weights. And also allows us to do some fun things like look at the representations of whatever the model is learning, and then kind of see how that maps on to brain activity, for example, when people are doing evaluation tasks. So we'll kind of open up those 2 black boxes together. And eventually we'll be sharing the data set of the 30-some tasks and all the languages, and as well as the scoring models, because we want to make this as useful and as open as we can. And then we'd also have other plans, things that are underway in terms of whether we could actually train models themselves to be more creative by kind of infusing them with human data to see if that can kind of boost their performance. So lots that can be done here. Want to thank the team that's involved in this work, and everyone who's contributed to the data set. I know there's several of you in the room here today. And thank you all for your attention. Okay, any questions?
I guess I'm wondering, in the new responses, is it new responses across tasks, or is it for a particular task?
Good question.
And how
So
is
that
the
is
performance different? Because I guess AUT new responses would be easier to generalize to, right?
Yeah. So the first one was new responses to tasks and items that the model has seen before, and languages, but they have been deduplicated, of course. So there's no repetitions of the responses.
So it's over all tasks that it's seen in training, but like newer responses of
Exactly.
those collected together.
Yes. So same raters too, exactly, across all the data set.
I have more questions, but later.
Okay, we can chat.
Any other questions?
Looks like Leanne and then some in the back too.
Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe you could develop an AI agent that was specifically geared to assessing creativity tasks, maybe by asking people when they're evaluating creativity, what constraints or what they use, and feeding that in directly into the AI agent, so that it would be specifically refined to perform well at this.
That is actually relevant to the next talk we have today. So I won't steal any thunder there, but I think like, yeah, getting more at the reasoning process going on and how people are actually evaluating instead of just giving the numbers, maybe that adds more predictive value or actually interpretability and explanation as to how the ratings are happening or aligning the systems. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I really like the big data set that you collected or put together. How do you make sure that OpenAI is not also reading the papers that other had published before? And so the new task idea, is it really new? How do you make sure that this is not seen in the training data, but ChatGPT or?
That's a good point. We haven't gotten that far yet. I think that the people have different approaches to like benchmarking evaluations of like keeping the test set kind of outside of the, the purpose of this isn't so much for testing the models per se, although we are interested in doing that as well. I think, but it would be a consideration if you were to try to do a benchmark like that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Roger. Our next talk is by Antonio Laverghetta. Antonio.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking a bit today about a study I worked on with Roger about basically trying to understand how both humans and AI reason about creativity as they're rating ideas. Now, let's say that we have some data from a creativity study that we want to get ratings for. And let's also say that we're not using AI to do this. We want to have humans score for creativity. How does that look typically? Well, usually how the process works is we give the rater some definition that we want them to rate for. And I'm going to be focusing specifically on originality today, which is one facet of creativity. The rater uses that definition to give us a bunch of scores to responses to some creativity assessment. And then finally, at the end, we have some process for aggregating the scores for multiple raters together. And so we have a single score for the participants' creativity or originality. Now, obviously, this paradigm has served us well. Certainly, it's allowed us to get a bunch of creativity data that is now letting us train AI models to score for different facets of creativity automatically. However, it does have the disadvantage in that it masks much of the underlying processes and sort of strategies the raters are using to actually determine their score. Even if two raters agree on the originality of a response, they could be using potentially very different internal criteria and judging the response in different ways. So let's, looking specifically in the case of originality, the field has for a long time now established that originality is not just this monolithic construct. It's actually composed of at least three different facets. Specifically, for an idea to be original, it must be remote, meaning that it is far from everyday ideas in a semantic sense. It must be uncommon, meaning that it's rare. And it also needs to be clever, meaning that it's an insightful or witty idea. Now, hypothetically, raters should be considering each of these individual facets when they are rating. This is what we tell them to do in their instructions. But our question going into this is, what does that actually look like in practice? And do raters, both human and AI, judge these different facets differently? And how do these individual facets look in relation to originality? How we looked at this was we basically recruited a sample of raters on Prolific to rate ideas from a test of the divergent thinking in science and engineering. This is called the DPT, or the design problems task. And basically how it works is that it's we give the participant some engineering challenge they need to think of ideas to solve. So like increasing the use of renewable energies. Our raters rated the originality of archival responses to this task, but beyond just originality, they also rated these fine-grained facets of remoteness, uncommonness, and cleverness as well. And we split the 80 or so participants that raters that we recruited into two different conditions. First, there was a condition where we, in addition to the task instructions, we actually gave them examples of prior solutions and the originality scores. We had ground truth originality scores that we obtained from professional engineers who rated as well. And there was also a no example condition where we didn't give them any additional context. So this helped us also tease out the effect of how the task is framed on how they judge these individual facets. We completed the same exact task using both GPT-4o and Claude 3.5 as raters, and we compare both to these ground truth scores that we had from our professional engineers in the archival sample. Now, looking at the results, first looking at the human data, we found that in general, and this basically what you're seeing here is this is a heat map of all the individual correlations. So both between each of the individual facets of cleverness, remoteness, and uncommonness with originality, and also with each other. So that's what that's showing you there. And in general, we found that most of these were in the range of between 0.4 to 0.7. So moderate to strong correlation, but it seemed to indicate that the raters were at least separating out their judgments of each individual facets, while still rating them in the sense that they appear to understand that these are all part of the same, I guess you could call it a super construct or a higher order construct. As we go, though, from the no example to example condition, specifically in the case of the individual facets with originality, we are starting to see this correlational structure change a bit. So specifically, the originality and cleverness correlation increases, but the correlation between originality and both remoteness and uncommonness decreased to a significant degree. Finally, adding these examples only improved the human raters' accuracy in predicting the ground truth scores for originality very, very slightly and not by a significant degree. In terms of the results from our AI raters, first of all, and not that surprisingly, AI was pretty effective in predicting the ground truth originality scores. Even zero shot, AI got at least 0.6 correlation, and that only increased with the few shot examples in the example condition. But if we look at the individual facet correlations, you can see that this is actually quite different from what it looked like for the human data. All the individual correlations are universally stronger across the board. And when we add examples, they only increase even more to the point where many of these are basically perfect correlation, which is a somewhat interesting finding that we haven't seen in the field before. And it seems to indicate that there's something of a homogenization going on in how AI is interpreting and rating for these subfacets, which mirrors homogenization that we're seeing in other aspects of using AI to both generate and evaluate creative ideas. So just to, how am I doing for time? Okay, just to sort of wrap up here at the end, basically what this points to is a misalignment between how humans and AI are rating for originality that hasn't really been studied in the field before. And it would be interesting to see whether we can replicate this effect in other samples and for other types of creativity assessments. Now, I'm basically only showing you like half of the paper here. There was other little linguistic analyses that we did as well to back up what we found with the correlational stuff. So if that interests you, the paper is accepted at CogSci, so you're welcome to go to take a look and read it there. And yeah, I'm happy to use whatever time is left to answer questions.
We have time for one or two quick questions. Any questions for Antonio?
Thanks. That's a really interesting talk. I'm wondering if you have thought at all or started looking at all at how the match between the model, like a model that's generating content and a model that's evaluating content might affect any of the ways that AI is reasoning about the content?
That's a really good point. It is something that we have started to think about, yes, and we've also started to think about, now that we have these reasoning models that can produce a thinking trace, what does that look like in terms of the model's thoughts, quote unquote? Is the model following a divergent and convergent process where it sort of is generating ideas and maybe scratching some ideas off in the brainstorming phase? Some initial stuff that we looked at there indicates that in thinking mode, it's not really human-like at all. It seems to follow these very rigid reasoning processes. It's too convergent. We're not really seeing the divergent piece there, which makes sense given that LRMs are really trained for solving difficult but well structured problems, right? The problem construction is not there yet. Did that answer your question?
That's part of it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's a really interesting talk. I was wondering if you could comment on using different AI models. So like you talked about ChatGPT, and I kind of see when we do qualitative analysis and we're trying to assess this, they perform very differently from one another. So if you look at what ChatGPT is giving you, it's very different from Claude. You can test them on alpha, and they interpret it quite differently. It's different from the case of alternative uses. So is it, and so it's so interesting to think of it as you're thinking of anything that you use as perhaps, or everyone here who uses it as one brain or an amalgamation of all. I mean, what is it that ChatGPT that represents? Is it equivalent to like two of us and one other person? Given that there's so many differences in these AIs, and there would be I don't want to say inter-individual, but inter-AI differences. So I'm wondering almost conceptually, what does this mean for us if we are just going to go, how do we choose which one to go for since they're so different? And is it like equivalent to a brain, equivalent to 100 brains? Because that inter-individual variation that comes from subjective ratings obviously applies in the case of AI as well, depending on the model you're using. So is there any sort of examination in the field about these sort of almost perhaps philosophical points, but they matter in terms of how people finally decide to use AI and what kind of systems they use, because it's obviously going to be revolutionary in how people are going to assess creativity. And so I'd just love your thoughts on that.
Sounds like a very good opinion piece to write. Yeah, so in general for this study, yeah, we did try to capture that a little bit by using at least two different models. Obviously, that's still very limited. We found for this that the trends between the models were largely the same. Obviously, the exact correlations varied, but we still saw the same trend lines for each of them. It is interesting in the sense that when I look at these results, it almost points to me that even though the model has good predictive validity in the sense that it is accurately predicting what the ground truth scores are coming from the engineers that went through the CAT and so on, it almost appears that at the same time, there might be weaker construct validity in some places in the sense that we know from the definition of the theory of what originality is that yes, these individual facets are related to originality, but they're not the same thing. I would not expect to see perfect correlations between any of these pairs like we're getting with the AI. Now, does that actually matter? Does that impact, later on? I'm not sure yet. We don't have the studies or the data yet to confirm. There are other work coming out that's now starting to look at, the rating process and doing a more fine-grained type of rating schema, like what we've done here, but I can't name that many papers off the top of my head that are doing it just yet. It is, I think, something we need to look at more carefully as we're building automated scores. Otherwise, it could be that there's a significant misfit that we haven't identified yet because we don't have the data to actually identify it yet.
Thank you so much. And you can find Antonio for more questions later.
Let me just skip past the backup.
All right, our next speaker is Bernard Barnes.
Hello, I'm Bernard. So I've done some research on art. So I'm actually not going to mention creativity even once during the presentation. So now I mentioned it. So now you know it's connected to creativity. So I've done some research on using artists, and I've compared their viewing patterns and preferences and memory of online and AI human art with non-artists. And just a little bit background about this. Can I get a microphone? Yes. Yeah, I have ADHD, so I like to move around, which is also one of the reasons I might drift off. Okay, so as you guys know, AI art is everywhere. So we see it everywhere, and some people like it, some people do not. My artist friends do not like that AI art is everywhere. I personally do. That's why I'm also standing here and talking about it. But there is a lot of scientific gap when it comes to research on AI art. There's actually not much research on how experts view AI art compared to non-experts, especially in online settings, which is where AI art shines nowadays. And yeah, so that actually brings me to like the core question of my research, and the reason why I started thinking about this is that whether AI art actually is just another stimulus, or is it seen and judged differently by different people, especially artists compared to non-artists. Yeah, so I had some research questions and hypotheses. Most of these, they go into like 3 sections. That's also kind of the 3 sections of my research, which is exploration, visual exploration. So do experts and non-experts explore AI art differently, and also human art, of course. And then there's the evaluation part of it. So here we're talking about aesthetic preferences. So do experts actually like AI art less than non-experts? And then there's also a section on memory in my research, which is related to whether AI art is remembered better by experts than by non-experts. Yeah, so what I basically did to test this is that I went very deep into our Norwegian National Gallery. There was 1,337 paintings, which were filtered through. These were mostly human-made paintings. And then I filtered down to 116 abstract and 116 landscape paintings, which you can see some of them here. So that was the experimental stimuli. And what I did is then I generated an equivalent amount of AI paintings in Midjourney. And I really tried to make them look as similar as possible while still being distinct pieces. Some of these might actually look very similar. Some of the paintings you will see actually in the background here. And then I showed them to my participants, which were 24 art experts. So fine art students from different, so they were studying fine art, painting, graphic arts, etc. And I compared it with 23 non-experts from social sciences and STEM degrees. Yeah. So I had these paintings, and these were the paintings I showed them. And how I did it was that I showed them online at home. I tried to make it as controlled as possible. So they would sit in front of a desk with a certain type of light. There was a distance. They should put their elbows on the table. But what they went through was basically looking at paintings for 5 seconds. And then right after that, they would evaluate them from 1 to 5 in terms of their aesthetics. So the aesthetic, whether they liked it or not, how aesthetic it was. And then in the second part of the study, they had a surprise memory test. And they would then press the screen if they thought they have seen one of the paintings. And that brings me to my results. So what I did, I ran Bayesian multi-level models on my data. So I compared expertise with origin and the genre. And what I found was that experts in general used broader, so they used larger scans at first. So I had larger saccades. They jumped a little bit more around the painting. And then they honed down, so they would focus on specific areas, which is quite typical for experts, especially art experts. But what was maybe surprising is that there was more focus scanning, like smaller fixation spreads for AI art. So basically, they would focus more in specific areas on AI art than non-artists and compared to human paintings. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. And then when it comes to evaluations, that's where I was, and also this is like the kind of finding that my artist friends, I really like it, they don't like it, because I didn't find any difference between experts and non-experts in evaluation of AI art or human art, actually. So it seems like they like these types of paintings, AI paintings. And this actually supports findings of previous studies, which there's not too many of, where artists do technically, if they don't know it's AI art, they say they like it. Yeah, this unaesthetically pleasant, it's not aesthetically pleasant. I was actually not going to put this in here. It's not the final, it's work in progress. But what I found when it comes to memory is that experts outperform non-experts, so artists outperform non-artists overall, which again makes sense. They're more used to it. But then they actually show stronger memory for AI art than they do for human art. So they remember AI art better than non-experts. And I just mentioned some like possible mechanisms here. I don't think this might, another reason might actually be that the paintings were pretty well made, or even that they were not that well made. But I'm thinking that there could be, especially this part, the ambiguity of authorship, there could be some novel things in AI paintings. There's something off, or they do see something that's not technically, might technically exist in real paintings. They don't understand it because they still like those paintings, but that makes them remember it better. Yeah, so yeah, just some conclusions. It seems that experts actually, they do show focused exploration of new AI works. And they do, it doesn't actually, they don't devalue its AI art. So they still like AI art. And they also have stronger memory for AI art. And the thing here, what I want to conclude with, which again, I don't think my artist friends would like this, is that it seems that expertise isn't fixed to human-made forms, which in my opinion means that artists actually can't see the difference. Or that they might actually like AI art more than they would think, at least when they see it on a small screen. And that's what we do a lot, I think, many of us, when it comes to AI art. Yeah, so I think that's mostly it. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe we have time for one short question.
Hi. So my father's an artist and I'm really not.
Wait,
so
sorry.
we've
when I look into crowds like this, I can't see where people
Hi.
are. There.
Hello. My father's an artist. I'm really not. Him and his best friend recently got in a whole argument about art. And listening to this made me remember, like you said, when people don't know it's AI, they often like it more. Is there a reason that you had them? I'm curious about your reasoning on why you told them from the get-go.
So I actually didn't tell them about, yeah, so maybe that wasn't that clear. I didn't tell them that this is AI art. I only told them that they were going to view different paintings, and then they did. Yeah.
That's way cooler.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. So yeah, that's what I did.
So much. All right, our next speaker is Claire Stevenson.
Yeah, maybe. Let's do it. Okay, thanks. Wait. I don't need it right now. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Stevenson. I'm from the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. A brief 3.5-hour trip from door to door. And I'm going to talk about one of our projects. It's on the automated utility scoring for the AUT. And I'll get into why in a minute. Okay. I'm going to let you guys be judges for a minute. So, do you think it's creative to use a pen to write a letter? If you think so, please raise your hand. Okay, a few people. All right. How do we go down? Oh, there we go. Do you think it's creative to use a pen to build a house? Yes or no? Lots more hands. Okay. What about to use a pen to build a toy satellite? I think there's even more hands now. Okay. Which is more creative? Building, do you think it's more creative to build a house with a pen or build a toy satellite? So raise your hand if you think build a house. Raise your hand if you think build a toy satellite. Okay. How did you come up with that? Were you considering how original it is? How like useful, feasible it was, or both? So only originality, raise your hand. Only how feasible it is, raise your hand. And both. Okay. That was their point, is that it takes both to really distinguish sometimes between ideas. So if you only look at originality, you might not get to the heart of the matter of how creative something is. And utility evaluation, it involves examining how well candidate ideas meet relevant demands of a given problem. So Matthias and others have written about that. It's very subjective though. If you have raters, the same experts, well-trained raters score originality and then score utility using just as detailed protocols, just as much practice, the inter-rater reliability is a lot lower for these utility scores. It's also context specific. For originality, we can use a lot of the same things to describe what is original for this task for like the AUT, but it might not work for like the feasibility or the value usefulness of the story writing task. It also requires common sense reasoning. Does a pen share these properties of with objects used to build houses or shelters? Mental simulations, visualizing a pen being dismantled and put together into the form of a toy satellite. There's also a very strong trade-off between originality and utility. It varies across tasks, but in the data set that we're using, over 50,000 AUT responses, it's about a negative 0.6 between originality and utility. And this trade-off is stronger for adolescents in our data set than for adults. They tend to value originality and kind of disregard utility. What's a creative use for a brick as a parachute? So they have a very strong preference for originality. With LLMs, the trade-off is the correlations are pretty much the same as for people, adults, I mean. Okay, so automated scoring, super cool, super handy. Thank you, Roger, and the open scoring people. This has been so helpful to score originality. But okay, so we have these two responses, and both of them here, you can see that their scores are somewhat similar, the build a toy satellite and build a house. But yeah, where's the utility? We don't really see that in the current scoring systems. And so automated scoring has definitely been a game changer for creativity researchers. There's a few caveats with automated scoring though, because the generalization depends on the trained data. So I feel like most of these tools have been trained on adult data, not much on kids and not on LLM responses. And what you see though is because they're not trained on this huge variety of data that you get whenever you have far more populations, then they tend not to generalize as well to, for example, scoring LLM. There's like a measurement invariance between when you're scoring an adult versus, lack of measurement invariance for scoring adults and LLMs or kids. Also, LLMs are known to love their own stuff. So that's a big problem. And there, from my data, I see a clear elaboration bias, when they're scoring, LLMs like to talk and they get paid for it, right? That's how the more tokens they generate, the more we're paying them our research money. So there's this elaboration bias, but that also gives them, inflates their scores. And that's something that I see, but I haven't published. So, we'll have to get into that another time. But now let's see what the automated and the expert scores think. So the experts like you all think that build a toy satellite is the most creative. And if we look at the originality and the utility, they're a bit higher for build a toy satellite than build a house. The utility is lower, and that's why it comes second. But yeah, the ranking isn't quite the same whenever you use these other tools, and they are, of course, geared towards originality. So utility can help us discern between which one is actually more creative. So our goal is to automate this. We know it's context specific, so we're focusing solely on the AUT. We wanted to include some common sense knowledge, so we are including predictors from knowledge graphs. We wanted to try to somehow gather features that represented the forms of mental simulation that we know that people do, and we want to have all sorts of populations in our data so that we can really generalize to the populations, these different populations. And I'm kind of against LLMs. They're so stupid. I wanted to create a machine learning algorithm, and it's like we know that that's not so smart, and that's okay, and we can explain it a little bit better. But yeah, so our results so far, our machine learning model is better, but it's really annoying. The best predictors are the number of words, maybe something from an embedding space, and inverse frequency in the data set. So it's like a negative predictor. So it's exploiting the negative correlation between originality and utility. And we had some prompt engineered things, and it's time for me to stop, so I'll skip that. But prompt engineered models did not do better. And so our future directions, I want to use new features that, and not even, I want to exclude number of words as a possible predictor and drop out the black box embeddings and frequency, and see if we can do some more things about, for example, the inferred object from a use. Build a house, and then they'll say, oh, brick, and then I say, no, the stimulus was a towel, and then see if that helps us estimate utility. And we have a challenge data set of curated responses from the edges of the distribution to really see if these models are not just predicting the median, or because yeah, the ratings are kind of all over the place. So, and then we need more expert judgment. So if you have ratings of utility for your AUT data, then please donate your data. Luke, wave your hand, please. Luke's over there. He's going to be at the poster. He might only be carrying a QR code because we haven't finished the poster yet. So, but you can talk to him about it and about how to contribute your data. Thank you so much.
We have time for no time for questions, but you can find Claire and team and Luke. Right, thank you. Our next speaker is Danica Zaretsky.
So hello, welcome everyone, and thanks for attending this talk. My name is Danica Zaretsky. I'm from the University of Graz, and I will present to you a recent study I did with Matthias Benedek, my supervisor, about the validity evidence of automated scoring methods for different response aggregation approaches in divergent thinking assessment. So to begin, researchers interested in creativity have long dreamed of a psychometrically sound automated solution to score test responses for their creative quality, and early attempts seemed surprisingly successful, like semantic distance, but recent or significant advancement have been only made recently with the advent of large language models. However, and this is key, the psychometric quality of large language model generated scores is still largely unknown. Yes, these models can generate ratings, but the real question is, how valid are those ratings really? So far, most studies have only assessed validity by correlating large language model scores with human ratings, but that alone doesn't really tell us if these models are really measuring what we think they are measuring. And another critical factor that's often overlooked is how we aggregate responses. In divergent thinking tasks, participants typically give multiple responses, and how we combine those into a single score can have substantial effect on validity, and there's growing evidence on that. And that brings me to the aim of the present study. We systematically investigated the validity evidence of 5 different large language models according to correlations with external criteria across multiple response aggregation methods. We focus on 3 main research questions. First, we wanted to know, how does the validity evidence of large language model generated divergent thinking scores compare to human ratings? Second, among the various models that we tested, which one performs best? And third, we ask, how do different scoring approaches influence the correlation of DT scores with external criteria? The large language models that we focused were the cross-lingual alternate user scoring Klaus, which is available as part of the creativity assessment platform, and the open creativity scoring with artificial intelligence, OXI, as fine-tuned models, which have been explicitly trained on divergent thinking responses. And we also included non-specialized models, ChatGPT, the generative pre-trained transformer in version 4. And as an addition to the abstract we submitted to this conference, we also tested Llama, the LLM developed by Meta AI and Claude by Anthropic. We built on a dataset from our lab collected in 2024. The sample included 300 participants recruited via Prolific, and they completed the alternate users task with 5 everyday objects, 4 minutes per task, with the instruction to be creative. And we also collected measures of creative behavior, self-beliefs, and openness to experience as the external criteria that then served as the validity criteria. And with that, we already come to the results. On this slide, you can see the initial correlation ranges between creativity scores from human raters and large language models. You can also see here that we focused on traditional scoring approaches like summative scoring and average scoring, and more recent aggregation approaches like top scoring and max scoring, focusing on 3 responses. And we see the correlations were overall aggregation methods substantial, so LLMs can approximate human ratings quite well. But of course, the real question is now, how valid are these scores in terms of correlations with external criteria? So let's move on to the more interesting part, the validity findings. To help orient you, this table shows the latent correlations between the scoring methods listed on the left-hand side, here focusing on human ratings, and the external criteria across the top. On the right, the results are broken down by the aggregation approach. Due to time constraints, I will not go into detail about the validity criteria, but as I said, we had measures of creative behavior. Here, the first 3 columns, then creative self-efficacy, also with 3 measures, and openness to experience. And what we can see here is that for the human ratings, summative scoring was quite promising, as we had very, very high correlations with the external criteria. But we have to keep in mind that summative scores are highly influenced by DT fluency, so the number of generated ideas. And that's why max 3 scoring is especially noteworthy here, because we know these results already. We have very high correlations for max 3 scoring, and therefore also a control for DT fluency. On this slide, now we see the big picture, the full picture, including not only the human ratings, but also the 5 large language models across all 4 aggregation methods. What stands out here is that some of the LLMs, especially ChatGPT and Claude, show remarkably high correlations, in some cases even exceeding the human ratings. And this is particularly true when max 3 scoring is used, suggesting that this aggregation method also works best for large language model-based scorings. We also see that models like Closer Oxi, although specifically fine-tuned for creativity, don't consistently outperform the more general purpose LLMs, which is a very interesting finding. To simplify our comparisons across models, we transformed the latent correlations into Fisher Z values and averaged them across the external criteria. And on this slide, we're just focusing on max-free scoring, since it emerged as the most promising aggregation approach in terms of construct validity and due to time constraints. What you can see here is that ChatGPT and Claude, as I said already from the slide before, show the highest average correlations with the external criteria, even slightly outperforming human ratings on this metric. To sum up, first, our results show that both the aggregation strategy and the model choice substantially affect the criterion validity of automated DT scores. So how we score and with what really matters. Second, we found that general purpose models like GPT and Claude can outperform specialized systems even without fine-tuning, which is both surprising and promising. As future directions, we see a few important next steps. We had some beautiful speakers before me, so this is where I can build on. One, we need to investigate how these findings transfer to other types of divergent thinking tasks beyond the alternate users task. And second, ensuring reproducibility and stability will be key. For example, by looking more closely at how different prompting strategies affect the results. And with that, thank you for your attention.
And we have time for one question for Janica.
It's really impressive stuff. So I'm wondering, what's the magic prompt that you use to get such high correlations with
the magic prompt?
Yeah.
Maybe I can show you. It was that we really tried to combine the adjectives that we knew works best for, or not works best, describes creativity most appropriately. So this is the prompt we used, but as I said, we do not know if this will be the same for another prompt with other adjectives. I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Our next speaker is Surabhi Nath.
Okay. Yes, too short if I stand here. Okay. Yes, so I'm going to talk about this super fun project. It relates to a lot of the ideas that have been thrown around already. For instance, I would like to believe that I'm a computational cognitive scientist who's interested in automation, like Roger said, but understanding, like the reasoning person said, and a lot of utility and process. So a lot of things all in one. So what we try to do is we try to look at some of these concepts in drawings, and we try to formulate a computational framework to do this. So what that means is that we are trying to look at creative evaluation, which we know by now, and we all agree, I guess, is some kind of interaction of novelty and utility. You want your ideas to be highly novel, but at the same time, you don't want them to be really low utility. And we try to see if we can kind of recover these basic principles in the visual domain and specifically in drawings, because drawings are a great modality. They're not as hard to produce as naturalistic images, but at the same time, you can be super creative with drawings. And this is example from Barbot's task on called MCTI. And this is what we use as our data set. So to study drawings, right, we need two things. One, if you want to try and predict creativity, we would need a data set. And if you want to try and arrive at general principles, you want that data set to be as diverse as possible. So in fact, we end up collecting drawings from across children, adults, and AI, which is in this case, DALL-E. So to go into that a bit more deeply, we have 1,500 drawings across children of two age groups. So we have the more younger children, 4 to 6 years, pre-schematic group, and a 7 to 9 year old children group called schematic group. And we have adults, and we have 3 different AI prompts. So one of the AI prompt has no content instruction. And then we kind of add some modifications to it to make it either object-based prompting or living figures-based prompting. And once we have this diverse data set, we need a framework to study these data sets. And we develop a computational take on this where we define two quantities, content and style. So content would be what, the meaning. So what is being depicted, and style would be how it's being depicted. So how it's rendered. So for style measures, we have ink density. These are all computational measures. Ink density, ink distribution. So how much of it was inside the mask versus outside the mask in the shape completion task. Number of components. So actually kids tend to draw a lot of components. One flower there, a heart here. So how many components could you spot in your drawing? And number of lines. So AI tends to have a high number of lines because it takes the line drawing very seriously. For content, we actually use measures in the textual domain and extend it to the visual domain. So this is a measure of originality. How far is your drawing from the base shape? And this you do in the text, in the image embedding space. But you can also do something like novelty. So how far is your drawing from the 10 nearest drawings in the text space? So you can convert every drawing to an embedding and then look at this distance from 10 nearest neighbors in the text space. So once we have these, we get some ground truths. To get ground truths, we actually have 2 expert scorers who are scoring creativity on 0 to 4. They are also scoring flexibility, which is how the 3 drawings that every person makes, how different are they? So that's a flexibility score. And they're also rating something very interesting, which I call utility. And in this context, it could be something like, how well is your stimulus shape incorporated into the drawing? And you can see here, for instance, this AI drawing is not great at actually using the V shape of the mask into its drawing. And then we have 2 automated scoring. One is AUDRA and the second is OCS. And these are both fine-tuned on this barbodes task. So we imagine that they'll be great. Spoiler alert, they are not. So we ask 3 basic questions. So the first is, how do the 3 agents that we have, kids, adults, and DALL-E, how do they differ? And how can we use our measures to basically tell those differences? And secondly, who is the most creative? And what do they use to predict creativity? What do they use to judge creativity? So how are the 3 drawing agents different? So they are pretty different. And using our 4 measures of style, we are able to see that AI has a lot of high ink. And a lot of that ink, a lot of high ink density, and also number of lines are pretty high. And a lot of these lines are also located outside the mask, whereas humans tend to think more inwards. So they kind of connect the lines that are already there. So a lot of their lines go inside the mask. And it's not such a prominent thing for AI. And for the components, like we guessed, kids tend to draw a lot more components here and there. So they had significantly higher number of components. For content too, we saw super interesting differences. So in the children themes, we see a lot of imaginative concepts. So there is ghosts, there's birds, wings, antennas, cartoons, ice creams. Who doesn't like ice cream? And for adults, there's a lot more themes. So the diversity is much more, and there's significantly lesser abstract drawings here. So they are successful in producing what they wish to produce. AI drawings, on the other hand, are largely abstract, either hard to interpret or abstract. So these are some interesting content level differences. We also looked at process differences. So flexibility, how the 3 drawings are different. And prompting helps a lot. So you can see in the last 3 rows, prompting has shifted it towards the right. And also more interestingly, I think for children, as they grow up, from pre-schematic to schematic, they suddenly become much more flexible. Great. So who is most creative? This is where things get a little more interesting. We saw that the 2 expert raters agree, the 2 AI raters agree, but they don't agree with each other. And the self-bias that Claire mentioned comes up again. The experts think humans are very creative, and especially the schematic kids. So tell your 7-year-old that they are really good at drawing. And the automated tools think that the AI is more creative. And this means that they don't agree. And why do they not agree? You can also see in their highest rated drawings, creative rated drawings, there's no overlap. So the right half and the left half, there is no overlap. So we fit really simple models using our features from the style and content. And we see that in experts, we have this utility interacting with novelty, very clearly visible here. In automated, it's really ink density doing most of the work. So ink density does a lot of the heavy lifting here. So the takeaways are human expert raters use both novelty and utility, and the tools yet are not there where they can incorporate novelty seamlessly. So that's a definite limitation. Human raters, expert raters also use multimodal information. So they have image embeddings and text embeddings both playing a part, whereas in the automated tools, it's mainly just image levels, details, and mainly ink density. We also see the self-bias. And finally, I think our framework is useful enough to study these differences more concretely, and it can also expand to, I guess, other domains beyond the visual domain. Thank you.
So we don't have any time for questions, but you can find us happy for questions and discussion during the break. Thank you so much. Our last speaker is Vera Amon. Okay, perfect. Hello, I will tell you a little bit about creativity and science, so we will switch a little bit gears, but yeah, bear with me. Imagine you're a scientist, as most of you are. You're at work. It's a normal morning at work. You just made yourself some coffee, and now you open your laptop to start working. But then you see something that catches your attention, because you see that there was a neuroscientific study released that showed that children with an enlarged pituitary gland, which is the structure at the base of the brain that produces and releases a number of hormones, these students also had a talent for math, while children with a smaller pituitary gland had a talent for language. And the authors conclude that brain scans could help us to assign students to specific types of schools in the future. This all seems a little bit weird to you because you doubt that the pituitary gland can have actually anything to do with students' talent. Now you try to distract yourself, of course, by scrolling through the news. But then you read that a robotics company just presented their brand new robot. And they explained that this robot is now actually able to think just like humans. This again raises your pulse because you doubt that the robot could actually think just like humans, but rather it is only simulating human thinking. But it seems that the world public is already convinced and you are about to lose your faith in humanity. So what would you do as a scientist? Exactly. You would want to find out whether your gut feeling can be proven by science. So you write a research grant proposal in order to get your research funded. And this is very similar to how we are investigating scientific creativity in our graduate students. But let's start from the beginning. So what is scientific creativity? It is defined as the ability to develop new ideas or approaches in the scientific field, as well as the ability to conduct creative science experiments and solving creative science problems. It is important that scientific creativity always relies on domain-specific knowledge. So for example, if I would want to investigate whether the pituitary gland has actually anything to do with students' talent in math or language, it is crucial that I have a knowledge about the human brain anatomy and also about some methods that I can use to investigate the human brain. And therefore, it is also important to investigate scientific creativity within the respective field of knowledge. If we look at the scientific process, Kramer and colleagues proposed 6 steps. The first step is kind of straightforward. So let's say you found a study about the pituitary gland, and your first step would then be to look exactly at this paper to see what the scientists did in their study. And you might also search for other publications in order to precisely understand the phenomenon. The next step would be that you extrapolate a very precise hypothesis that you could actually test with an experimental design and proper statistical methods. The third step is that you think of an actual experiment that with that you can test your hypothesis. And now it comes the time where you're collecting data. And after completing data collection, you then prepare and analyze the data in order to obtain the experimental results. Lastly, you would communicate your results to the scientific community. That means you present your data at a conference, or you could also write a research paper and submit it to a journal in the field. If we take a look at AI in science, we can see that the question of how to foster scientific discoveries through AI has been a major topic in AI research for many years now. And today, many scientists, and I'm sure many of you too, are using AI models like specialized AI models in different steps of the scientific process. But also non-specialized generative AI, such as ChatGPT, for example, have entered the scientific field. And especially ChatGPT has been tested in different stages of the scientific process. So in our study, we wanted to see whether ChatGPT achieves similar or even better results in contrast to our graduate students in a scientific creativity task. In our task, we asked students to write a short research proposal for different fictitious research scenarios. And today I'm presenting, as you have already seen, the neuroscience and the robotics scenario of this study. So students were given 4 assignments for each of these scenarios. First, they were asked to generate a hypothesis. Then they were asked to describe the experiment that they would want to conduct. Third, they had to list the equipment that they need in order to conduct the experiment. And lastly, they had to explain their rationale, so why they think their approach is a meaningful way in order to investigate a topic. And ChatGPT received the exact same scenario with the exact same textual inputs as the students. The proposals that were written by students and generated by ChatGPT were then evaluated by experts from the respective scientific field, and we used a structured rating questionnaire for that. Our results show that ChatGPT reached higher overall scores in both scenarios. So that means overall, our experts rated the ChatGPT generated proposals superior to the human sample generated proposals. However, if we look in the field of how original or creative the ideas were rated, we did not find significant differences between humans and ChatGPT. But as you can see, the most creative ideas still came from the human sample. So this is good news. So although this was a very dense representation of our results, I would like to share some considerations that we had while asking ourselves whether ChatGPT is the better scientist, because it depends. In our task, ChatGPT was extremely successful when it comes to listing the equipment that was needed in order to conduct the experiment. And also, we concluded from that ChatGPT can help to jumpstart a scientific process, for example, by providing a first impression of the state of the art in a completely new topic. The problem is, and we heard that already today, we always have to be careful regarding intellectual property, especially in the field of science, of course. And we always should check ChatGPT generated outputs for hallucinations and logical errors, of course. Humans, on the other hand, still have produced the most creative ideas in our scenarios. And we concluded that humans have an advantage when there is a lack in knowledge domain, because ChatGPT always relies on previous scientific ideas, especially in this robotics scenario that I showed you. We concluded that ChatGPT lacked these ideas because, of course, there's no study out there that shows that there is a robot that thinks just like a human being. And so this could give an advantage to our graduate students in this regard. Lastly, I want to say that, or we can say that humans, in contrast to ChatGPT, can have truly revolutionary ideas, although not every human idea is truly revolutionary. Thank you so much for listening.
We have time for one question.
Very, very interesting research. Now, so as I understand it, the grad students here were essentially, it almost sounded like they had to do like a mini grant proposal for this, right?
Yes.
Do you think that might have maybe confounded the results a bit, because there's a certain grantsmanship that's a skill that needs to be learned separately from designing the experiment and such, and maybe that's a bit too much for the average graduate student to be able to pull off.
Yeah, thank you. That's an important point. So in our study, we used exclusively students from a research-focused program at our university. And so these students had also a class where they had to write an ethics proposal. So they were kind of skilled in that domain already. So yeah, we try to account for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And this concludes our second symposium. We have a little 15-minute break before we reconvene for the panel discussion. 5-minute break, 5-minute break. Thank you to all the speakers for great talks.